Hamaroiki, hamaro matua. Kua ole ato mautolu ki he hawa nganga tapu. Kia whangai mai ha mautolu a tau pulotu ma tau loto matala. Mua atu ki he āwhine haki mai niwe koe atua. Moi hana tau whawhonga tala ki he hana tau whewhikawang. Ke lo ngona e mautolu ho kuro koe atua. Moi ha mautolu a tau pulotu ke kisia ai e hao a fulu koe atua ke tau tufunga sia. Tā kina mai I hawa nei ke kamata mautolu mo koe a te hoko ke he whakausianga. Āmene. Kia mnuina ha tau tōru whakahoroanga.
Whakawelahi mainga ki he whangianga I hatu tōru ke lata e mea no mela tōru he whahita punei. Mā honei manako au ke whakawhelewhi atu ke hatu tōru a purotu he whahita punei. Introducing our presenters for today, Coral Siale Pasisi and also Brendon Pasisi. Coral Siale Pasisi is currently a senior advisor to the Director General of the Pacific Community, or what we know as SPC. She's also a member of the Strategic Advisory Board of the Global Climate and Security Risk and Foresight Assessment 2021. And also last year, she was a briefer to United Nations Security Council on high-level session on climate change security. And she is also the current president of Tofia Niue. She has 20 or more years of experience in regional and international policy, multilateral agreements and arrangements of sustainable development, climate change and climate change financing, particularly from Pacific Small Island developing states. Also, we have Brendon, who is a marine biologist, and previously, before that, he was the director of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. Tukua tu e mahoni kia Coral ke whalawhala mai hana tau kumikumianga po ke wharufu ke tau purotu ke lata e matautu e mapea whakawe.
Whakawelahi ma Ioani. Hofi e tau whalawhalahi atu ki a tau tolosi. Mua atu ki a koe ma lilifu whekau he atua ko Reverend Inga Mokalei. Mo e lilifu takitaki he Tagata Pulotu series Ioani whaawai mo e hawa matakau. Tuku atu hakoa tau manatu whakawelahi. Hako e kotofa lilifu nei kua tuku mai ki au. Ke whalawhala mo e whakalaulahi mai e longa he wholu a taunga hua lalahi mo e mahuinga ke mai longa e tauturu mua atu mai atu hau tupuhake Pasifika mo e niwe whekai. And hello to all of my cousins. I think this looks like a family affair. Very nice to see you all here and through this medium. It's a real honor to be invited to participate in this and to share some of the knowledge, all of which, or much of which is borrowed and hoped to pass on to other colleagues in the next generation, certainly. I'm just going to bring up I'm not sure if Brendon has actually joined. He was going to try, but we have had a few challenges with connectivity from their office. Just ping me if you jump on board, Brendon. So I might just share my screen now, if that's okay, so I can start a bit of a presentation. Could you just confirm if you can see the slides on your screen? Okay, perfect. Well, thanks very much. So as Ioane, that's a very generous introduction, Ioane. I'm a scientist by background, but my passion and drive for this area of work has come from growing up in Niue and fishing and planting taro and having the privilege of that experience right from when I was little. So I think the best school that I went to was that environment. I probably learned more from that in my career, to be quite frank, than going to university in overseas. And so I think the value of us learning about Niue, our culture, our language, and our resources is a level of armor and education that really helps to take us in our careers, no matter where we end up and travel through our lives. So I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, I kind of chose not to speak specifically on climate change and climate finance, partly because it's, I thought you had a few other speakers in this space as well. And, but rather I would try and speak to you today about a project that is closer to home, that is also looking to address some of the challenges that we face in climate change, and more importantly, look at developing a sustainable financing mechanism on the back of those efforts, so that we have these efforts in perpetuity, rather than what we all know has been the dogma of Pacific aid and development assistance over the last 40 years, is a very stop-start, fragmented approach to ODA. So, so I'm going to talk to you today about the Niue Ocean-wide project, which I hope some of you have already heard about. And I will give you just a quick overview. So I'm going to speak a little bit about where our place is in the Pacific and globally, why this is a worthwhile initiative for Niue now, some of the objectives of the NOW project, the public-private partnership, which I think has been a critical part of the success of this initiative and effort. Some of the key achievements that we've had to date. I'm going to focus in a little bit on the sustainable financing mechanism, and then some of the next steps. And then I'd be really happy to take questions and just have a general discussion about what kind of a future it is that you want for our ocean and our people and their affiliation with it into the future. Sorry, I think there's a couple of people waiting in the waiting room. So I wanted to show you this map. This is a map of all the exclusive economic zones in totality across the Pacific, excluding New Zealand and Australia's. So this, our collective blue real estate of Pacific Island countries and territories constitutes 20% of the total EEZs of the world. And if you add New Zealand and Australia to that, then it's about 30%. So in essence, this blue Pacific continent has a very significant real estate and therefore voice in the ocean space globally. So it's a very important part of how the world views us, and certainly how Pacific leaders are recreating a narrative based on this platform of authority and contribution, as opposed to what has been a couple of decades of small island states perspective as we step into the regional and international discussions. And why is this necessary now? Why is it important for us to work and take particular focus in this effort? So we've entered a stage where there is absolutely unprecedented pressure on the oceans from human beings. We will soon be at a point where we have more plastic in the ocean than fish. Global warming is causing all kinds of challenges, and we have some really stark statistics around the impacts of climate change on the marine environment. I'll just give you a couple of statistics around this to give us an idea of what that impact is going to look like. So the IPCC report, and actually there was another one that just came out a couple of days ago, but I haven't had a chance to go through that yet. But the 1.5 degree IPCC report, and for those who are not familiar, the IPCC report is the global scientific report that is used as the basis for the factual evidence to inform climate change negotiations and decisions. So there's about 3,000 scientists around the world who agree on the science that is presented to the climate negotiation process. It's really important to qualify this, right? Because scientists are very factual. They don't make judgments on whether things are likely or unlikely to happen. They just give you a percentage based on facts. So scientists look at all the elements in which climate change will impact the world, and they give that information to the parties to negotiate in the climate change process. So it goes through a filter then of interests of countries at a foreign affairs sort of level. So it is watered down from that scientific fact as much as it possibly can. So what we get at the end of the day is a watered down version of the facts that everyone says this is okay to agree as the benchmark of where things are heading. So we're reasonably confident that these facts are quite clear and accurate. So we are facing scenarios that within the next 10 years, by 2030, we are on track for 2.5 degree warming in temperature. So that is with the latest commitments that were made by the recent Leaders Summit that President Biden hosted earlier this year. So we have got a long way to go to change that lack of ambition to reach the target that all our countries have been pushing for, which is no greater than 1.5 degrees in warming. So I'm going to give you just a couple of impacts associated with the difference between a 1.5 and a 2 degree increase on some of our ocean resources. So there's one on the screen there around the coral reef systems. So it's we envisage that there will be between 70 to 90% loss of coral reefs at 1.5 degree warming, and greater than 99% in the 2 degree warming scenario. So obviously for countries that have strong ecosystem-based services around coral reef systems like Niue and other Pacific Island countries, this is going to have massive implications. Some of the associated challenges for us are the dependency that we have on fisheries for livelihoods and food, for coastal resilience and stability, amongst many others. So this is part of the reason why our Pacific leaders, through the Forum Leaders Arrangement, have very strongly in the last 10 years, but particularly in the last 3 years, pushed this notion of a Blue Pacific strategy, a 2050 Blue Pacific strategy, so that we would look into the future and try and ensure that we are as creative as possible and ambitious as possible to set goals and targets that we want our region to look like, what we want it to look like. And that we use the platform of this blue continent as the basis to lead an international charge to attain that and the support necessary to reach those targets. So this is very much involves fisheries, security, conservation, and the blue economy. And so the ocean real estate that we have is particularly valuable in that context. And when we look at what we are currently doing with our resources, both near shore and offshore, we really need to start looking at what's the maximum benefit that we can get from that resource in a sustainable way that helps also contribute to these major challenges that we have in pollution and climate change, etc. And about 10 years ago, Pacific leaders started championing and leading a global charge on establishing large-scale marine protected areas. So beyond the close shore ones that we traditionally have done in the past, to include the exclusive economic zones and even beyond that into the deep blue. So this is just a slide of some of the facts around the importance of building a holistic approach to the way that we use the ocean to ensure that we can build its resilience over time. And I mentioned some of these challenges before around the impact of climate change on the ocean environment. So we have between 70 to 90% of Pacific people who depend on coastal fisheries for food sources. At the same time, we know our latest science and modeling at SPC is telling us that by 2050, up to nearly 20% possibly of the tuna that currently are harvested from the EEZs of Pacific Island countries could move up into the high seas areas where they can get caught basically for free by, ironically, the countries that are also polluting the most in relation to climate change. So that redistribution of stock, tuna stock, as well as health, will have a big implication on the revenues that are coming into Pacific countries. In addition to that, with the growth of populations and the deterioration of coastal fisheries, we will most likely need, within 15 years, 20% of the fish to supplement the diets of Pacific people will need to come from those tuna stocks. So we have many other challenges to the blue economy. Lots of our tourism industry is based on the pristineness and the healthiness of that marine environment. And there are varying studies in this space that I think look well beyond 30%. I don't think those figures are as accurate as they could be, but there's a lot of science going into make that assessment now. So conservation is an important part of the overall effort in the use of the ocean to ensure that it is sustainable into the future. And we need to look at how do we maximize, if we invest in that space, the returns that will come back to Niue, and ensure that this is not a disproportionate burden put on a small island developing state to protect this resource that has a much greater ecosystem value beyond Niue to the region and indeed globally. So the Niue Ocean Ride project was an idea that was hatched around late 2014. And it kind of has come from a range of things. We've seen other leaders in the region make announcements. I've been involved in some of those other activities in the region. Brendon, who was the director of agriculture, forestry and fisheries at the time, had spent over 20 years in the space of fisheries negotiation in the region. He's probably one of the most experienced negotiators in that space and has a great breadth of experience in Niue, but also in the region in managing what is now the only healthy fish stock left in the world. And Josie, Dr. Josie Tamate, was also working in agriculture, forestry, and the fisheries at the time, and now is now is the Director General. And she has also a strong background in fisheries, having worked in FFA and economic planning. So the three of us got together and looked at the opportunities that there might be in this space, and what the government had already set down as a number of policies wanting to pursue a sustainable development agenda and certainly a sustainable fisheries management approach. So from that, we developed a project proposal, and we were very lucky to have a forward-thinking and flexible philanthropic partner in what is called Oceans 5, who was willing to provide some money to help us take this forward. And so basically the Niue Ocean Wide project has come about from that, and we call it NOW for short. So the overall goal is a holistic, sustainable development and management of our ocean resources to improve livelihoods of Niueans now and into the future. And there are three major objectives. One is to establish a strong marine spatial management planning system, which basically means we have a plan that covers the entirety of our real estate, which includes the full EEZ. And within that, there'd be a number of tightly managed zones of use and conservation. Secondly, that we would develop a compliance strategy an enforcement strategy that would bring credibility to that plan. So we don't just make a plan without having the capability to enforce it. And thirdly, that we would focus on uses and conservation to underpin a development paradigm and revenue generation system that would be sustainable into the future for Niue and its development aspirations. So this is largely done through a public-private partnership. So I am on the private side of this partnership. I, at the time, was a consultant and working from Niue, servicing a number of clients internationally. And this is an area of passion. So all of my invested time in here is donated. This is part of my Give Back to Niue effort. And then through Tofia Niue, the nonprofit organization that we set up, I have an executive who has I have a vice president, treasurer, a secretary, a couple of advisors, and a number of other stakeholders who are donating their time as well to support this effort. We then, on the government side, the Ministry of Natural Resources is the focal point, and that's Dr. Josie Tamate, led by her. The Director of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, who's Poyo Kasene. And then we have the Director of Tourism and the Justice Lands and Survey representative who brings the GIS capability to the partnership. And more recently, we've got the Financial Secretary engaged and Crown Law as well. So this governance arrangement is the one that we use, and we have an MOU of agreement so that we work together to meet the objectives of the NOW project. And then we have a project team that's employed to run the project, and Brendon is the head of that project. And we have one officer who sits alongside him to support this work. And then we have a number of international partners, and it truly is a public-private partnership. We have private businesses who support different elements of this, non-profits, and just citizens as well. And I think this has been a really significant part of the success of this effort and the sustainability of the effort so far. So where are we placed now? So we started, the project really kicked off at the end of 2015 once we secured the funding. So it's probably been going solidly now for maybe going on to 5 years. So I want to just highlight a few of the things that we've managed to achieve in that time and where that puts us as a country in this space. So we now are recognized as a regional and global leader in ocean conservation and sustainable development. The commitment by the government and agreement to establish 40% of our exclusive economic zone as a large-scale marine protected area is a very significant contribution to global conservation of the ocean. This puts us into an elite group of countries, a limited number of countries with sizable commitments like this. We are the first country to put 100% of our EEZ under a marine spatial management planning system. And we are the first country in the world to lock up fishing rights associated with that large-scale marine protected area. This is rather than transferring that effort out of that area into another area where we would be fishing just as much under normal circumstances. So we have a compliance strategy, and we have tested a number of advanced technologies to try and ensure our ability to use that and enforce that compliance strategy. So Brendon's done a lot of work in this space in coordinating the trial of drone technology, fixed wings and other. That can go out the extent of our EEZ and basically take pictures or bring back information to help inform our decisions on the ocean, but also to monitor and survey those areas to make sure that there's no one actually fishing in that conservation area. More recently also, we've had a global fish partnering with a global fish watch, which is a web-based portal that allows you to track who's been fishing in or around the areas that are under conservation. So if we have time later on, I might try and bring that up to show you what that looks like real time, or we can provide it later if people are interested. We've enhanced our marketability and credibility as a sustainable tourism destination. Lots of countries make commitments in ocean conservation, but they don't follow through with them. And so there isn't a credible product upon which to market their industry. So there's no point telling everyone, tourists, that this is a sustainable destination, and then they show up and our marine operators give them a plastic cup and a plastic bag when they step out. So we've got a lot of effort in the development of sustainable tourism policies associated with this. We've spent a lot of time trying to get our people to see what an amazing and incredible resource that we have. Not everyone has the privilege of going under the water and seeing what's down there. So we've got some pretty amazing scientific reports now, and we have a National Geographic documentary. I hope some of you have been able to see that. And on our website, you'll be able to see a number of videos as well that take you underneath the ocean. Brendon has managed to, with his fisheries friends and boat owners, take every child in Niue out on the ocean, and focused as well on taking many women from every village and matuas in general out on the ocean so that they can see Niue from the sea, catch some fish, and just fall in love with that incredible taonga that we have. So in undertaking all of this commitment, there's a fair bit of work to continue, and that's going to cost money, and we can't rely on projects forever. So as part of this project, we have developed a sustainable financing approach, which is called a sustainable financing strategy that is tailor-made for Niue's situation and its commitment. And there's some elements of that I will now explain in a little bit more detail. But obviously, as COVID has hit, this has changed the landscape and the potential to harness some of those resources in the short term, but we believe that staying the course and maintaining the capability will aid us in bouncing back from this economically, socially, and environmentally on the other side of the pandemic. So I'm just going to talk you through the proposed elements of the sustainable financing strategy. So this is a piece of work that I undertook as a consultant as part of this work, and have consulted many people in Niue and internationally in its design. So essentially, there's a couple of two big elements to it. One is an endowment. So we're seeking to mobilize $20 million for an endowment that would be contributed to by a number of different sources, and that would largely service as the key financing instrument for the work going forward. We also will establish a sustainable trust, and this is the operational element. So the endowment's kind of like the long-term investment, if you like. And then the sustainable now trust is like the operational mechanism, as well as maybe an operational account that you would have in a bank, similar to that. So we would mobilize the target of 20 million is based on a revenue generation of around $1 million per annum in interest, and that would go into the operational trust. The operational trust would also house, be able to capture other resources. There's many other types of funding that are potential revenue generators to capitalize that as well. And those can come from levies in tourism, visitor fees. Also, there are many development partners and donors that provide small amounts of money here, there, and everywhere for little projects, which take up a huge amount of administrative time to write project proposals, access, report, and monitor. All of those things, those are transaction costs that are very hard to manage in a big country, let alone a small country with a small administration. So the idea is to consolidate all those different little bits and pieces into one arrangement that would allow then for a more sustainable investment in a range of different things. And so this trust would then be able to disperse payments and grants and concessional finance to a range of activities that help to continue to reap in the benefits to support the investment that we've made in the Now project. So one of the key things when you lock up an area and you remove the ability of country to sell some of its fishing rights commensurate with that conservation area is there is a potential loss in fishing license revenue to the government. So if we want to generate enough resources to put that money back into the government so that they can continue to have the capacity to manage the ocean environment, because that is, you know, it comes under their remit in governance and management. Amongst many other things, they cover the costs of all the fishing, all the sea access, lighting, and support to villages, and all of those things that are related. We also want to ensure that we can put funding into every village council and committee that has been set up to have local area plans and conservation and sustainable development plans, so that they actually have a consistent stream of funding going to them every year that they can allocate to implementing incrementally their activities in this space. In the past, they haven't had this certainty. They've had opportunities to apply for grants here, there, and everywhere, but there just isn't this capacity to be able to do that. So this is a little bit like a budget support based on the plans that have been set up with them as part of the Now project effort and collaboration with Ridge to Reef project as well. And there's a number of other areas of investment that could be possible out of this arrangement. An area that we want to be able to support is the private sector who invests in businesses that are sustainable using the ocean space, right? So that could be dive companies, fishing companies, reef tours, all of those kinds of businesses are the engine that generates money for the economy in Niue. And if the only reason why a lot of those businesses can't expand or grow is because they simply don't have access to finance. We don't have banks here that loan money. We don't have a bank. We have a national development bank, but that is a very limited source of funding available, and not every business can access that. So we want to have a concessional fund that is available to help to grow those businesses in a sustainable way. And the more capability we have in that space, the greater potential revenue back into the country to continue along this journey. We also want to look at reinvesting some of that to ensure that that real-time value of the endowment remains in perpetuity. And another key area that we're looking at generating funds for is what we're calling at the moment a risk reduction fund, which you know, could be anything from like insurance or an instrument like that. Basically, because there is a high risk in investing in business in the ocean space because of cyclones in particular and bad weather, we want to be able to have funding that can help to bring that risk level down. And as we have climate change impacts, those risks increase. For example, someone who invests in a fishing charter business, they will not, into the future, the number of rough days that we have where the boats can't go out is probably going to increase. So that cost to a business becomes greater and greater over time. So if we had an insurance instrument, for example, that looked at business interruption insurance, or even rebuilding after a cyclone, etc., that helps to bring down the risk of investing in this area. So that's where we're at the moment by way of implementation of the first phase of the project. We've just secured late last year an add-on to this to fully roll out and implement all of those things that have now been set up. So we are in the moment fully in the process of designing and establishing that endowment and trust fund and capitalizing and looking at the options to capitalize that. Part of the discussions at the moment around capitalizing the fund are looking at establishing conservation units. So rather than selling a unit of fishing, like a day of fishing to a commercial fishing business, you'd sell a conservation unit to a partner who wants to invest in ocean conservation. And they're beyond reducing the number of commercial fishing days in the region or effort. There are many other associated benefits with that conservation, which include things like resilience building, carbon sinks, spillover, ecosystem appreciation, etc. So we're also developing now the details around the marine spatial plan within the 0 to 3 kilometre zone, which is the area that most Niueans are very interested in because it affects them daily. So the designs, Brendon and the team are out consulting with all of the villages and designing that process at the moment. And those are the plans that we are hoping to generate the funds from the sustainable financing strategy to implement sustainably over time. So that's a summary of our project, where we're at. We've got a website, and I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that if you like. There's a few really cool videos that help to explain what marine spatial management planning is for those that are not familiar, and we'll introduce you to the full team that's working in this space. And of course, this is an effort being done for all Niueans wherever they are. This is not just about Niueans here in Niue. These are resources that we all own. They're public goods for all of us. So we're always really happy to explain what the effort is and engage people as they're interested to become part of the partnership or contribute in any way that they'd like to. So with that, I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Kaulai. Kua tu game tōre mō nei, whai huhu na kai.
Well, if no one else has a question, I can start that ball rolling, Eel.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Carol. Is it Coral, for the presentation. So I suppose my question or comment, I think it's more question anyway, is what are the Niuean understandings of ocean conservation and climate change? And has there been any attempt to try and integrate those into your work currently in Niue around climate change? The reason I'm asking this is there's a lot of a lot of the traditional knowledge around preservation, conservation actually comes from within rather than external too. And so has there been any thought around integrating some of that? Because when I was listening to your presentation, I didn't see anything that kind of related to Niuean ideas or concepts around conservation or climate change. So that's my question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Iyo, is it okay? Do you want me to answer the question now, or
that's fine.
Sure. Okay. So thank you. That's a really important question. So thank you for raising it. Yeah, the short answer is yes, absolutely. The whole concept is actually built very much around our cultural affinity and identity with the ocean and the way that we've always used it. Our ancestors used it in a sustainable way. both near shore and offshore fishing, as you know, had many different tapu approaches to how that was done. And so those are all central parts of the overall effort. One of the reasons why at a high level we've pursued this is because culturally it's not a hard sell to Niueans to respect the ocean and all of its resources and to give back for the next generations. So this is why it's actually been such an organic process for us to build from that idea into a momentum where all the communities are very much behind that entire effort. And then, so when we were first consulting on whether or not we should establish that big conservation area, we undertook a big scientific survey of Niue and Beveridge Reef, and came back to showcase that documentary and all of the findings, and visited every village and presented to every community what this was about and the proposal to set up a conservation area that would help to build the resilience of Niue to the impacts of climate change, which Niueans are also very aware of. There's many climate change initiatives here, and the government runs a very constant process of capacity building in this space as well. And there was unanimous support for the 40% that was proposed. The reason why we proposed 40% was because that was the minimum to get into the exclusive club of large-scale marine protected area countries in the world. But in the actual consultations, many of the matua and even the young people wanted a much greater portion of the ocean put under conservation. And even a couple of the ministers were very happy to go down that line as well. Yeah, in short, yes, absolutely, it is a central tenor throughout all of the effort and the things that that have been done in the process. I see that Brendon's actually joined now, and so if I may, I'll defer to Brendon to add to these conversations as well.
Yeah, I'll hand it over to Brendon.
Ya, whakalofa ia te ke mutoro osi. Male a kua punga mai whakatosi. It's good to see some familiar faces and a few familiar names, but not too much to add to what Carol said. I think, although it's not maybe reflected in some of the slides, as Carol said, it's very central to the work of the project to make sure that we respect the cultural and traditions of the country and our affinity with the ocean and the coastal sort of area. I think one of the big challenges, if I can just add on to what Carl has said, is that most Niueans, if not all, are very familiar with the concepts. And Carl said there's been many projects run by government and other, even some NGOs around climate change and building resilience and adaptation and all those sorts of things. I think the one greatest challenge that we are seeing now, myself included, having been involved as a public servant for many years in ocean resource management, the same as on the land here, is that we all know what needs to be done. We all have a great appreciation of conservation, but when it comes down to individually observing that, monitoring it and enforcing it, it doesn't really work. And that's the space that we're actually trying to focus a bit more effort into, particularly with the young kids, the children. We're working a lot more in the schools in this space because the old saying, you can't change a leopard's spots, runs quite true with many Niueans. And so the challenge has been that traditionally in the old days, if we can call it that, the resource was in a much better condition. And so what's changed since then, what's changed in the last 40 or 50 years really has been not only climate change, but increase in technologies that have allowed us to harvest more. The development on the land is leading to, the Makassar runoff onto the reefs. The ocean itself is warming up a little bit, so we are experiencing more bleaching events and all those sorts of things. So we're trying to provide additional awareness to say that in order for us to be resilient, we not only have to try and manage the resource by cutting back so that the resource can rebuild itself to the olden days sort of status, but also add an incremental piece of management or regulation on how much we take and how we use the environment to cater for the change in climate. Because all of the natural resources here continue to decline, some faster than others. But if you look at the ocean space, we're overfishing shellfish, crayfish, clams, bottom fish. The pelagic fish is beyond our control, some of it, because it's fished at the regional level. So yeah, we're really challenged now to try and put the brakes on and also move back further from that. We often use pigeon and the flying fox, the pecha, as a classic example of where we haven't been able to put the brakes on. Everyone can see the decline. Everyone knows that it's going down. There are rules, there are policies, there's laws around it, but we continue just to ignore that, and we carry on our way of life. Sometimes I guess the perception is that because the population is so small that we can continue to do this. The reality is that's not the case, unfortunately. Yeah, so I think those are some of the challenges, and that's why we're investing a little bit more in the compliance side of things. Carl's already pointed out we have a compliance strategy, not only focusing on distant water fishing countries and people trying to sneak in and take too much fish, but this is about you know, our own backyard, our own villages, and our own amount that we take. We don't need that much as in the past. I think our grandfathers used to go out and work very hard to try and get a good catch with old types of lines and not so fancy hooks and no torches, maybe the old domi or something, and you know, and that's the difference. They didn't have freezers to store that. They didn't have the kind of economy that we have now, where everyone aspires to a much higher standard of living. So you're paying your power bill, everyone wants TV, they want to drive their car, have one for the bush, etc., etc. So you know, that's the reality, and that's why. And then the other side is we take it because it's a delicacy. It's something we're used to eating, and so therefore we believe it's our right just to go out and help. The old folks usually say, if you don't use it, then you know, God gave it to us. If we don't use it, maybe Rev, you can comment on that. But yeah, I think that's one of our challenges. Not only in the ocean, but same on the land. I think I can see a few smiles there, so everyone sort of knows what we're talking about. The young ones, I think, are where we are sort of resting our hope that we can bring them to a point where you know, they will be the custodians and the vickies in future, because it's a different place now than 50 years ago, and it's the two generations, ourselves, our fathers, or my father at least, that did all the damage. So in 2 generations, we have overexploited some of our resources here. Notwithstanding the climate impact of Category 5, Cyclone Heta, we realize now that it's taken almost 20 years to try to return to the natural state of the environment to where it was. But in all that 15 or 17 years that's passed, we haven't stopped fishing. So when you knock something down really hard, you should stop and let it rebuild before you start again. But that doesn't happen in reality. People still have to go onto the reef. They still want to catch fish and whatever, so they carry on fishing. Often they increase fishing effort because they have to fish harder in order to catch the same amount as they did before. So you might maintain the same levels of catch, but you're actually working harder, you're going further, you're diving deeper, all those sorts of things. So anyway, that's probably a long answer to a very simple question. happy to be able to contribute. Thanks.
Ko hai fuki ne whai huhu whakamare. I think Annette Pusimani had some comments there on the chat. Annette, did you want to elaborate on that, or those are just some of your comments in regards to the presentation?
If go like Mike, if no what to keep my pumping all of here to get them down enough anyway. I like it's just comments really. I'm interested in waste management and landfill because that often does get underlooked or not as much exposure, of course. And I wonder whether the models and passion exists for waste management, landfill, the Brendon, and the impact on the coast that has and always has had to a point. Just think of the punga that the forefathers used to bring up from the ocean. But yes, some thoughts perhaps who's responsible to concentrate on that area. And Coral was mentioned funding available from on international levels. Who's responsible for that area? I don't want to take away at all any attention from the marvelous work and efforts, collaborative efforts that have been mentioned, past, current, and future.
Thank you. That's a really important question, actually. 80% of the pollution in the ocean comes from land, so that was definitely a part of the original project development, was to look at the current development planning guidelines around development that has implications on flows into the ocean, be they makasea, other waste, solid waste, and wastewater as well. One of the other key projects that is being implemented actually in the same sort of time as the NOW project is what they call the Ridge to Reef project. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but the same department is implementing that, and that basically looks at sustainability from the ridge, middle of the island, out to the reef. And our project is predominantly looking at that coastal line out to the 200 nautical mile zone. So there is a full suite of coverage of these kinds of activities. So we have looked at the runoff, and especially, I don't know if you're aware, but the effort to road Niue is it has only been stalled because of COVID. This is supposed to have started a couple of years ago. And part of the NOW project helped to resource an environmental impact assessment around the runoff specifically into the ocean area, and to look at what kind of technologies would be needed to be installed to help reduce that. We also have areas where we know that happens a fair bit, down at Utukor, the wharf area. And part of the project also has looked at what kind of filtration systems might need to be put in place to help reduce that as well. So those are works in progress, but it's not easy to get expertise in this space who are available to do some of this. So that will progress over time. Having said that, the government itself has been looking more recently at waste management and establishing a proper waste management system. And I understand that is progressing now, and that will look at removing where the current waste site is down at Makato to another location, and establishing a proper solid base and filtration process to ensure that leachate is captured as well. So the Environment Department looks after a lot of that side, and so does the Health Department. And they also look at, they've got activities that are trying to look at improving the septic tank systems that are in place as well. So there's a fair bit going on in that space, but not enough. There's never enough effort to deal with this issue. One of the challenges that we have with climate change at a larger level and waste management is, if our countries are not fast enough to uptake the technology and don't have the money to purchase that technology, we will soon become the dumping ground of obsolete technology. We did that when the world switched from analog phones to digital phones. We bought all the analog phones for $1 a piece, and then we were stuck with infrastructure that was outdated and had to be changed eventually anyway. The same when they changed the combustion engines to a higher level of octane requirement. We got all the cheap vehicles from New Zealand that no longer met the New Zealand standard as well. So now European countries and big companies like BMW, Tesla, they're all moving to electric vehicles within the next 8 years. If we don't change our laws here and policies and put in place the necessary infrastructure to encourage the private sector to invest in this technology, we will soon inherit all that rubbish again, and we'll have more bodies of cars to deal with than we can deal with currently. So there is a strong link there as well.
Thank you, Annette. Now hand it over to Wendy.
Hi there, I'll turn on my video so you can see me and I can say hello. Hi Coral, thank you so much for the talk. And hi to Brendon as well. It's really neat to see you guys again. It's been a long time since I was on Niue. I think it was 2000 or 2002 that I was working in fisheries, and it is so amazing to see where you guys have come. Not that I'm surprised, because things were going well then and there was a marine reserve, but to see like all of this marine protection, 100% marine spatial planning plan, like that is really cool, you guys. And you guys just deserve a lot of credit for that. I've worked a bunch of places around the Pacific now, several different governments, and it's really neat to see little Niue shining so much. Super, super cool. And it's also amazing to hear about your sustainable trust that you have going, because I've heard a lot about marine protected areas, and so many places are trying to work on that, and I've almost never heard about something like that happening, and that is really just like, I think that will really serve me so well, and it's like a component that I think a lot of people don't think of. So that was really amazing to hear about. And Brendon already actually touched on some of my main question, which was about enforcement of your marine protected areas. And I know that's something that pretty much every marine protected area struggles with in a lot of ways. So I was curious a little bit about kind of what you think your main challenges with that are. Like, are you optimistic to have really good enforcement in the future? And I wanted to hear a little bit about that drone that's going over the beverage, because that sounds really cool.
So I'll just quickly just to say thank you, Wendy. It's really great to see you again. For those of you who aren't aware, Wendy was a Peace Corps worker who came to Niue quite some time ago and actually worked under Brendon at DEF. So I'll let Brendon explain that a little bit more, but Wendy has contributed in her lifetime to Niue's ocean work and obviously in the rest of the Pacific. So it's really great to see you come back home again, Wendy. It's really nice. I'll let Brendon speak to the enforcement and the drones, because this is an area that he's got a lot of experience in, both in Niue and in the rest of the region.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. And thanks, Wendy. It's always good to catch up. Crikey, it was that long ago. We have to be careful here. We're giving away a bit too much of the time that's gone past since we last saw you. But yeah, I think the two sides of this is that's really important to us is working with the kids, the young kids, and trying to invest in awareness that's meaningful to them. I mean, the hardest thing Niueans are very smart people. We all know about conservation and stuff. It's just the behavior that we have to try and change in people. And there's only really two ways to do that, in my mind. One is to give them the awareness and empower them to be able to do something. And the other one really is to take the stick out and chase people around, and the drone is one of those means. Is we don't want to go out and, you know, make money from prosecuting people. The whole idea with the drone technology, first and foremost, the small drones around the island here and long-range gigapan cameras is actually, it's trying to deter people from going into areas that might be closed off. And so we have a co-management arrangement where we're working with each of the village communities. They have a resource management advisory committee that the village council have agreed. We're doing marine spatial planning village by village. So they will have their own protected areas or their own special management areas. Is that it's supposed to be able to help them enforce that. And so enforcement, as you know, is always the hardest thing to do, especially in a small place. It's like shooting the pigeon in the pecker. If you can't police that when people are letting off a loud gun in a small area, you can hear them for, you know, miles away. So if you wanted to find somebody and, you know, and stop them from shooting out of season, it would be the easiest thing to do. I mean, we still can't do it because it's challenging. And so we're moving to that sort of technology because it means that even if I am operating a drone and I come across coral, or my brother fishing illegally in a restricted area, there isn't that face-to-face difficulty of trying to say, oh, it's okay, bro, just don't do it again, you know, move on. You're just looking at a piece of technology, and the technology will record it. The person who's caught doesn't know who's operating it, and therefore you've collected your evidence without having that confrontation with people. Once you sort of get that up on a few of those runs on the board, I think people are very conscious. It's like the drink driving checkpoints on the island. If any of you have been back recently or had the pleasure of going for a checkpoint, they're the same as checkpoints in New Zealand. You know, that you once you know that they're in place and they're likely to be in different places, you become a lot more aware. And so, you know, this is not a fisheries officer vehicle pulling up. You can hear and take off or hide your stuff. This is a little drone that would drop over the edge of the cliff and be upon you before you even realize that somebody's watching. And so, you know, that sort of approach is hopefully going to be a little bit of a game changer. It still needs dedicated people to drive it. And so we really do have to focus on some incentives for some good people who are fair but are able to hold the line on these sorts of things, and they don't mind. They are paid well enough to do a good job, and they recognize the investment and the long-term benefit versus the kind of pushback they will get from the local community. So if you're planning to run for office at any stage your career, you probably don't want to be an enforcement officer because they're often frowned upon by most of the community as being the bad guys. But yes, eventually we have to do it. We've got laws for Africa and Niue, but people often have very little regard for the law because, you know, we're all guilty. We've all gotten away with it for so long. Just because I don't shoot out of season doesn't mean I don't enjoy or will be able to refrain from having a little bit of pigeon somewhere midway through the year when they're on the rare tree or something like that. I mean, everybody is guilty one way or another, so it's something that has to be done across the board fairly quickly. So those are some of the challenges, Wendy, that haven't gone away since you were working here. Offshore, we're pretty good now. It's quite hard for foreign vessels to sneak in. There's no old pirates anymore. We've used synthetic aperture radar. satellite technology. We've got AIS tracking, VMS tracking. We will be testing drones with X-Craft New Zealand. Some of you may have seen that company. More recently, they're working with Niue in New Zealand, testing ocean prototype, the Nemesis. We're actually in discussions with them to see whether or not we can bring those up there. They have underwater hydrophones with Australian CSIRO that operate to switch a camera on. So if these were located at Beveridge Reef underwater, as soon as a vessel comes into the proximity, it will wake the camera up. The camera will look for that vessel, and they have special algorithms to determine what kind of vessel it is, whether it's a merchant vessel, a fishing vessel, etc., etc. So yeah, there's a lot of technology out there. It does cost a lot of money. I think just going back while I can to Annette's question on waste management, there's a lot of waste management work going on the island. So we're not going to try and duplicate that, but we do provide input to the roading project. We've written in and submitted to them, and they have taken on board the drainage system. So most drainage systems now will run in to the inland and not out to sea. We've looked at some more sophisticated systems out of Australia for capturing that and filtering, but at this stage it's just too expensive and unsustainable, I think, here to run that kind of infrastructure. So we can do the best of what we can do. Other small things we've done is on the plastics front and the general rubbish. And so after 30 years of sort of working, was astounded to find that we don't actually have a basic regulation or law here that stops people from dropping rubbish on the roadside. If I walked out from my office now and dumped my little bucket of office rubbish on the road, there's a good chance that I wouldn't be able to be had up for doing that. It just doesn't exist for some reason. So that's one of the areas that we're actually working on, because despite there being a small population, there's still a lot of rubbish on the roadside here. So if you walk or if you cycle, you can see it all the time. And so again, it comes back down to human behavior. That's what we're trying to manage. And so, yeah, it's across the board. Thanks.
So Rob, you have a question there about expatriates, communities contributing to this project, and not that we want to rely on New Zealand, but what responsibilities do they have given Niue's Aram status?
So thanks very much for raising that, Rob. I think that's a really important point, and it's actually one that Brendon and I and others here have sort of discussed. How do we, Niueans are our biggest capability, wherever you are, whether you're here or New Zealand, Australia, or anywhere in the world, that brains trust, that experience, all of that is the biggest hope that our country has to maintain its sustainability and resilience into the future. And so any effort that we possibly can create to bridge the gap that there is between our physical locations is really important. And I think this is where COVID has actually been a little bit of a blessing in disguise, in that it's created and forced us down this digital transformation area where we have had more discussions like this to talk about what's happening here. And I'm not overly familiar with the systems and the groups that are set up in New Zealand, but we're trying to strengthen that in general, so that we can collectively come up with solutions about how we draw on the capability and capacity of Niueans wherever they are, because our biggest challenge here is bums on seats, is people to do the work. It's not hard to get money, it's hard to get people who are committed to making sure that that money is used well and accounted for in a way that enables further funding to continue to flow in this space. So the more that we can do to inform you about what's happening in Niue and where there are opportunities for expertise to come in and support or remotely support, you know, that would be great. And so we welcome, you know, your suggestions on how to better engage with Niueans in New Zealand and Australia and elsewhere. One of my pet peeves, I have to say, over the period of my career is I get interviewed often by young students from all around the world about the cutting edge stuff that we're doing in climate change and ocean spaces. And they go away and get PhDs and then come back and become our bosses. You know, I really want our own people to utilize these resources and the efforts and experience that we've built up from Pacifica, so that, you know, our own people who have a natural affinity to protect these resources, a vested interest in the state of these resources into the future, to come aboard and feel that they can use these efforts like the Now project and the Ridge to Reef and others in Niue as case studies to support their own interests in growing their careers at university as well. I think on that point, I'm going to jump back to the original question that was asked about the degree to which traditional knowledge and practice has been integrated into this. So in general here and in the rest of the Pacific, we don't have enough science to inform good decision making. We have enough to see trends, and we hope that those trends that we have scientific data on are projecting down a track of reasonable certainty to inform our decisions now. But we have, you know, we've got a lot more traditional knowledge and historical knowledge and traditional science that informs our decisions around resource management now and what kind of a future we want for our kids into the future. It's just not verified in a system and in a way that Palangi science is verified, and therefore it doesn't get integrated in the same decision-making systems necessarily. We are starting to bridge that gap with geographical information systems, where we can digitize some of that information into a GIS system and overlay it with the science and cadastral planning and all of that. But there are many other areas in which we haven't documented traditional knowledge and cultural science, so that we can verify it in a system that we agree to, and then it can actually formally be considered in decision making. And for me, in the climate finance arena, where we never have enough data to fulfill the international access to climate finance project proposals, if we could verify Niuean traditional knowledge and the 50 or 60 years of backcasting views and eyes on the water knowledge that our people have, we can fill those gaps. We would have more than enough knowledge, but we don't have a verification system for that in our country or the rest of the Pacific. So it's still considered anecdotal data. So I think Niueans are the only people who can do this. You know, they're the ones that know the actual experience. They're the ones that know how fulkovi we are on some of those things, and appropriate ways to capture that in a mechanism that is sanctioned by our own protocols, our own traditional protocols, and secure to inform that decision. So there is another area of academia and science, and if someone has got the time to invest in that, that is an area that would be very much welcomed to help inform our decisions in the region. Thanks.
Thanks, Carl. Yanni, maybe if I could just add on a little bit, I guess just onto the comment made by Rob. I think in addition to what Carl's added in terms of expertise and capacity from outside of Niue, I think that'd be really welcomed wherever people have an opportunity to provide that, or even if they are able to put up their hand and identify where they can provide support. We're always looking also for, you know, some contract work into the project itself. So great if you're able to make a contribution, but even if you just avail your expertise and services, we can consider whether or not the project's able to tap into your experience and expertise. I guess the other one, which Carl has sort of touched on in her presentation on the sustainable financing strategy, is there may There may, in the near future, become an opportunity for those of you that are right placed and know the right means for us to develop some merchandise and other crowdsourcing funding arrangements that would perhaps be able to contribute back into the trust fund. You know, and a couple of those things include the Niue stamps. We're looking to make a special collector's coin, you know, that marks the Wana Mahu, the establishment of that, because it's a huge achievement in Niue's history to put aside, you know, that amount of conservation area. I think too, I just saw Matangi had your comments on there, and I think just in terms of tourism and the drivers behind what's pushing some of the exploitation rates and whatever, you're absolutely right about that. Tourism is one of those drivers, and that's why the project actually invested well over $100,000 up front. In Cora's presentation, you might have seen the sustainable tourism strategy. The project actually resourced the consultancy through the tourism department for that. And we're pushing, we were quite strong on pushing for a cap on the number of tourists coming in here. I think it was around 12,000, even though there was like a 3 or 5% growth rate year on year. At the time, it's just saying, well, actually, we don't want to be making $30 million off 20,000 tourists. We want to be making $30 million off 10,000 tourists. And so that niche marketing, getting people to pay more, but having less, so a higher quality tourists sort of coming here. Niue is not really big enough for the backpacker type freedom camper model here, because you know, they do have a high impact on the natural environment and resources. They're lovely people, but yeah, in terms of the economics behind it and what have you, yeah, it's trying to get that balance, because as you point out in your comment, yeah, the more people coming in here, the more demand there is for natural resources, the more the fishermen fish, the more the people collect shells, the more craft there is to be sold, and you know, the list goes on. And so those pressures are something that the sustainable practices and the accreditation process for sustainability that is also built into the program around tourism operators is something that we've invested in quite heavily to try and offset that. It's always going to be a challenge, but you know, we can only do our best, and finding the balance will always be a challenge with any government in power, and the people, stakeholders involved. You know, so the private sector will obviously push back on some of the regulation, but if they understand why it's there, and if we can get them a better dollar for less exploitation of the natural environment or resources, then everyone hopefully be satisfied. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, if I may just address one more issue that Rob, where and all Niueans can assist us in the capitalization of the trust and the endowment and the responsibility or the relationship that we have with New Zealand in this context. So I don't know how many of you know, but there's, you know, these discussions globally around the new biodiversity targets. The last ones were from 2010 to 2020, and it was 20% protection by 2020, 20% of representative ocean areas by 2020. So the next one that that is being pushed for is 30 by 30. So 30% of ocean area representative of important habitats should be under protection by 2030. So that creates a global market for conservation. When you have a demand for a global agreement, you have a demand, the value of that contribution becomes something that people are interested in supporting. So if you look at New Zealand's current commitment to ocean conservation, I think it's gone up in the last couple of days, but the last count that I saw, it was around 1% of the EEZ So it's vastly lacking in that contribution. And so if you look at a country like the UK has announced 55% of their ocean waters and the territories of the UK around the world, they are supporting with their Blue Planet Fund for conservation. So they are meeting and exceeding this global target. So this is where I think the conversation with New Zealand and the encouragement to New Zealand, and we'll be doing this with other partners, to invest and support these commitments in the realm countries, but also the wider Pacific, would be extremely helpful. So when they get to the podium internationally and can't say that they've met the global target directly themselves, at least they can say they've supported their small island developing states, realm countries, and others in the Pacific to meet those kind of targets. So we'll be looking for all of you to become salespersons once we have the trust fully developed. Thank you very much.
Nuhi, you have one more question?
Yes, just one more question from me anyway, is so currently I've worked in the region for nearly 2 years, but I'm based in the Cook Islands. And one of the things that I do notice here is that somebody drives the agenda. So say for health, and I work in the health sector currently, the World Health Organization drives that agenda here in the region. But in terms of climate change and who is driving that agenda for the region?
I guess there's a couple of issues here. If you mean who in the region drives the global, the ambition in climate change effort, it's most definitely the governments of all the individual countries of the Pacific. The Pacific Small Island Developing States are amongst the most vocal in the international climate change negotiation process. They have the highest moral ground to argue greater ambition because they are frontline in receiving the implications and effects of climate change, but amongst the least contributing to that. So I think our countries, our governments have made very strong positions on this and have driven strong directives, both to the regional architecture as well as the international architecture. And I think this is where, so from a mitigation perspective or a decarbonization perspective, there are very strong voices. All of the commitments made by Pacific countries are pretty outstanding by way of their national contributions to mitigation and their efforts to decarbonize by setting renewable energy targets that are very high, for example. Their ability to meet those targets, however, is very dependent on the access to climate investment, climate finance to transition to those low carbon technologies. And this is where we all collectively are trying to mobilize great amounts of resources into the region to address that. From a regional architectural perspective, the Forum Secretariat, or the forum leaders themselves, not the Secretariat, the forum leaders who meet annually determine the political commitments and statements as the Pacific position on climate change. So the last big declaration that they were able to make in their last convening, physical convening, was in Tuvalu, the Kainakitu Declaration, and that is also the strongest declaration that forum leaders have been able to make on climate change. So the forum obviously includes New Zealand and Australia, all the independent states of the region, plus New Caledonia and French Polynesia. Then there's a separate group which is called the PSIDS, Pacific SIDS, and that's the 14 independent Pacific Island countries, which includes Niue and the Cook Islands. So right from the political level down to the officials level and up to the youth and leaders of the youth and community groups, there is a very strong moral and negotiation position on what the region wants. When it comes to implementation, however, so if you're looking at what drives the action, that is still very dependent on the access to resources and the ability of our countries to articulate and translate their commitments, for example, in renewable energy. So Niue is committed to 80% renewable energy in their NDCs, national determined contributions, but that is conditional on finance. So they use that commitment, which will be coming into, so it's legally enforceable to have to put that in place under the Paris Agreement. They will be using that as the basis to solicit enough resources to take us from the current 40% to that 80% target. So by setting the policy directives, both for mitigation and adaptation, it then enables us to try and get the funding to meet that ambition. Internationally is a completely different story. I think we'd need another 2 hours for that. But thank goodness the US is finally back on board, because at least we have a narrow window of potential recovery now that the US is back in the camp. Before that, it was looking at much bleaker than it is now.
For you, for
I just...
Oh, sorry. Both of
no, you go. You go. I'm always leaving myself to the last minute, so you go, Jess.
I'm the younger, so you go, Marie.
Hmm? No. I was actually just going to. It's more a comment. So I wanted to thank you, Coral and Bren, for the great work that you're doing, and it's very necessary to be doing it. And I'm also glad that you're keeping it all in-house, like you're keeping it in Niue. I think that's wonderful. But just I'm gathering, not knowing too much how the infrastructure works in Niue, I'm gathering that there's already steps in place at the moment in terms of limiting the quantity of fish that are caught at each time the fishermen go out, and also in terms of the plastic coming into Niue. I'm sure that there's already anyway, but I think going back to what Annette was saying, it is very much to do with the stuff that's coming from the land. Like you were saying, Brendon, 80% of the pollution is physically coming from the land. And you were also saying that, you do need to educate and you need to make aware to the children, but obviously the children's parents will also need a lot of the awareness as well. And I can gather that is a lot of the limitations and the challenges that you're having. But I'm just so proud of you guys. And I knew that you did a lot of work with the island in terms of climate change and marine biology, Bren, but I didn't know to this extent. So fantastic work, and I'm happy to be a salesperson for Niue. And you did answer the question I wanted to ask, where to from 2022, what are the future plans? And you have already answered that, Coral. But I think at the end of the day, the other question is, what can I do, or what can we do collectively right now to help you guys? Yeah, so that's really all I wanted to come in and say.
That's awesome. I just wondered if Jess wanted to ask her question, and then we can answer both at the same time if you like.
No, it's actually a little bit similar. So whakawelahi mahaki kia moa. Thank you both for your contributions. They've been amazing. It's so good to see you. In what looks, are you both at Te Lava Arches? Is that what's going on? It's actually a kind of a build off from Marie's question, which is having taken kids and also some of the elders and women out to view the island differently. I kind of wondered if you've seen much change already in the behaviors and attitudes and the kinds of roles that students and people in Niue are actually looking to do or looking to take up in the future.
So thank you both. To those of you who don't know, both Marie and Jess are our first cousins, and have been here and seen and fallen in love with the environments, which I think is the most important thing, right? So a lot of our effort in this space is because we had the privilege of growing up in the ocean, and we know that there's probably 20,000 Niuean kids that don't get that same opportunity. So if we can bring that, if we can capture how amazing that is and share that knowledge, but also at the same time share the knowledge that it is under more threat than it has ever been, and we have to we have an important role as the custodians of this resource to reinvest in its sustainability, and it's going to require everyone's effort. So I think just learning about the project, go to the website. If you've got questions, please ask. Don't be shy to ask us to set up a separate consultations with your groups in New Zealand or Australia or wherever else on specific issues. We're more than happy to do some deep dives in areas that might interest you, so we can explore how you might be able to engage in that depending on your area of interest or expertise. So we're completely open to that, because it will only work if we've got the people who are vested, who have a vested interest in its success. Like I said before, it's not actually hard to get money. It's just really hard to have the number of people required to use that appropriately and keep those wheels going. Just on the questions around imported plastics, regulations and things, there is a law around the importation and use of plastic bags, single-use plastic bags now. There are more efforts starting to roll out in that space. But I think one of the challenges that we have is we often take an international concept and apply it straight here, when it might not actually be the issue for us. And I use plastic bags, and I don't work for the government, so I can say this is not a government position, but I look at the single-use plastic bags as an example, right? There is no such thing as a single-use plastic bag in Niue. You take it from the shop, then you use it to either put your fish in and put it in the freezer, or you use it to wrap up your existing rubbish, because we don't have the big fancy machines that come and take the whole thing and pour it and take it to, so that we don't have that same kind of challenge here as it might be for other countries. And so you have to analyze the waste stream to see what are the biggest culprits here. And so we've had a few plastics campaigns where we go out and pick up rubbish, get the kids involved, everyone, and we analyze what is the main culprit in this space. And it's things like plastic bottles with imported water, which is bizarre, right? Because we've got some of the nicest water in the world here. And so, and even, the straw issue, that's not a huge issue here either. There aren't that many places that use straws. So they are still important interventions, but those have become the ones that have been sort of addressed quickly because of the international hype around these particular issues. If you see a turtle with a straw stuck in its nose, everyone wants to ban plastic straws. But we have to look at what the actual issues are here. And Brendon and I have this complaint session all the time. It's the growing number of packaging, plastic packaging on the imported items that's the real problem now. And being able to have a simple facility of recycling that or repurposing it that we don't have. And these are areas where our families overseas and Niueans anywhere can help design simple to use shredding capability, heating and melting capability to turn plastic bottles and stuff into cyclone shutters or something useful for us here. So that the innovation potential is enormous, and we've got lots of ideas. We just don't have the people to take those ideas and work with a company that you might know in New Zealand to, you know, modify that idea and turn it into something that both you can make money out of and that is actually useful for us in addressing an environmental problem and the resilience building problem to the growing cyclones that are coming. I'm going to let Brendon cover the responses around the kids and women out fishing, but I can certainly say from my own children who do get to go out with Uncle Brendon and Uncle Paul occasionally, it just changes their perspective immensely. Learning about it in a classroom is nothing compared to taking them out. Even I take my kids off the wharf snorkeling, and to see the coral and the different fish, they also learn the vernacular by doing that. You know, they wouldn't know what a monenga is unless you actually are in the water following it around, and a papa or anything else. So all of those those experiences, I think, are incredibly important, and getting them immersed in that physically is fantastic. And if we can't do that, then bringing it virtually is also something that we want to be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want me to add something onto that, Carl? I think just to say that, yes, those are our two cousins. One has been up here working. Jess has been doing her own studies. Marie, you've been partying too much while you've been here. That's why you need to get with, learn a little bit more about the infrastructure and stuff. So your next mission up here, we'll have you in the office a couple of days. So very good. Seeing all the comments, if I've missed someone's comment, thank you very much for the kind comments. I just wanted to say that, and thank you, Ani, for the opportunity to come in on this and share. There's certainly a lot of other people behind the scene that aren't here presenting with me and Coral that also deserve some of the kudos in the work that we are doing. So we're trying to make our contribution towards it. I'm still here because of my passion for the ocean. It's a little bit cold down your neck of the woods, but it's becoming more and more attractive as the challenges become greater here. I can tell you that. I think one of the things that's really become obvious to us as we've developed even the systems, and we're trying to keep them as simple as we can, but they actually demand quite a bit of their own complexity to have the integrity to be able to attract the resources that we need and to actually have credibility. But it does take some servicing, and we, at the same time, we're trying to develop these and roll them out. We're trying to build capacity, and you know, one of the things that is very obvious in Niue now is the capacity is just not there. That's a major challenge going forward for Niue, and I think that's sometimes why we get caught up in the situation where it just becomes overwhelmingly too big a problem and a too big an issue to deal with, and then it's too easy to say, well, that's the government department's job. Why aren't they doing it? And then people don't take it upon themselves, you know, to have that cumulative effect of all doing our part. That's a challenge over here, and that's one of the things that I think, at least for me, that I've sort of seen. You know, yes, we're working with the children in the schools at certain times, but it's only a very short time of their time that we get to interact with them or go in for an event or something like that, an activity, whereas they are with their parents in their communities for 98% of the time. And so if they're not observing the behavior that they should be, it doesn't matter how many times you tell kids not to drop rubbish because it affects the animals in the ocean or in the environment. You can see a lot of the roadside rubbish is coming out of the school buses. I think that's my perception. And so those ideas are not changing. If they're still going to the bush shooting with the old man, you know, but they're not observing what they're hearing in the school. So those are some of the, you know, the ongoing challenges. But, you know, capacity to roll out management frameworks, to put in place monitoring, control and surveillance operations, to have the resources to allow that to tick over, train young people to do that. You know, it's been happening for years and years here. The capacity level fluctuates over time, and I think you're some of the classic young people that are, you know, that are the brains of this country, but you know, are also overseas pursuing your dreams and careers as well. And so, you know, that hasn't stopped. I think that draw from for young people. Same with my kids, my younger kids now. You know, is trying to get them to stay engaged and interested in staying on the island here is still challenging. You know, and it is becoming more challenging perhaps. Yeah, so I think those are some of the things. Maybe some of you have some good ideas around that might help us in how we approach that, or it is just looking now that we, you know, New Zealand used to be quite a way away, sort of a little bit more like that this day and age with COVID, only one flight a week. But you know, in recent years, it's only been a hop, skip, and a jump, literally. So you know, maybe the model is that doesn't matter where you are, even communicating like this. That's what we need to be sort of looking at as building that capacity to help the small government administrations here as well. Yeah, and we're thinking about that very much now as we come towards the end of this year, this first, and then there'll be a final year of the project next year. So we're already starting to think about the exit strategy, where to from here, how do we carry this on so we don't just invest all this time and effort, set something up, and then it just comes to a standstill, like many projects before it, you know. And that's the game-changing nature of the sustainable financing, is that it really looks to carry on what's been set up here and not rely necessarily all on budget, extra budgetary project funds that stop and start and are driven by outside agendas, and also, you know, take half a year to write, take 2 years to be approved, then they arrive, you know, the island sort of moved on, the priority for government has changed a little bit, and then you try to retrofit a project to suit what your needs are, and you run into all sorts of challenges doing that. It's really high maintenance. You just don't have people to be able to do that. So thanks very much, Yuan. Thanks everybody for your kind comments, and if we've missed any, please feel free to reach out, and we'll try our best to keep you up to speed or answer any of your questions. Thanks very much.
Just looking at the time, I know there's quite a few questions in there. Yeah, send your questions through to the website that Brendon had already put up in the little chat over there. But kua te manatu whakawelahi mahaki, ke he amua tau alata matala, kua te whatuwha mai, ke he laulahi ne kua whalataha mai ke he tau kua loa whakawhana whekau nei. Mga ho nei tuku atu ke he tātakitaki mai he Tupumaiaga Trust, ne whakangahuahua ke whakatua e whakahaloanga nei koe Tagata Pulotu Seminar Series, ko Zora Feilo ke whai manatu whakahiko ia ke whakatoatoa ki hatau tōru whikau he māmahi aho nei. Kausi ia tō tuku atu whoki ke hatau tōru a matou whikau ko inga ke whakausi ai ke he riomi. Whakawe. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, just like to say thank you to Coral and Brendon for coming to talk to us about the Niue Ocean Life project. It's been really informative. There's a whole range of information that you shared, and it's really interesting, and we're really grateful for that. Thank you for being a part of our Pulotu series seminar. Really grateful. Thank you, Eel, for organising our seminars, and Dr. Nuhi and Dr. Colin. Thanks to Inga for the blessings, and on behalf of Tupumaiaga and Niue Trust, we thank you all for participating, and hopefully we'll see you next week, and check into the Niue Ocean-wide website. Koetalo.
Koetalo, Zora. Just before I hand it over to Inga, next week we have Cora Allen Wycliffe, who will be giving the talk on hiapo making. So we're looking forward to listening to Cora's presentation next week.
Yeah, whakawelahi Cora and Brendon, ki he tau pulotu, diongia tau tōru. Moui to tolo tākina mai I hova nai, e pulotu he tangata niwe ko ngona ai e mautoro mai toi ai e tua e taunga hua mitaki kua whakawhita ki ai. Haha iai fōki e longa he tau mena kua ngā hua ki ai, tuko te mautoro ke he hao a whakamuinanga ko e tua, ke tū mau e puna mai anga he tau mena mitaki. Hako whiwhire koe a mautoro ko e tau tangata, ke le veki mai pui ai e hawa tau te whungasia. Ha nei whaurua tau mena ko ngona ai mautoro. E hova na e ki haha ki ai hawa lima, ke he takita ki anga. Mo ki sia ai e tama motu tose ko niwe. Hane fusi ai e masini ko e tua, mo takita ki ai. Hako ingoa hao, wa ore mo hulalo ai a mautoro. Kia monu si tonu, mo i to tolo, ke ingoa hao Yesu Keriso. Amen.